Hello, everyone. I want to talk to you about the 8 marks of a catalyst today. My name is Rick Curtis, and I'm the West Region Mobilizer for the North American Mission Board. Before I get started, I want to give a shout out to Kevin Marsico, who is the Northeast Region Mobilizer for the North American Mission Board. He is my counterpart with NAM, and he laid the groundwork for this 8 marks of a catalyst work that I'm covering with you today. As church planting catalysts for the North American Mission Board and our state conventions, we need to look at what it means to be a catalyst and how do we become the best catalysts that we can be. These 8 marks are just a starting point for each of us to hone our skills as we endeavor on this high calling. We really want to be about owning a geography as a catalyst. We don't just want to plant a church. We want to own the geography. We want to own the city, own the landscape, if you will, and make a difference for the gospel of Christ in that area. As a catalyst, that is a high privilege. It's a high calling. And so I challenge you today to really think that through and ask yourself what that means in terms of your daily ministry. We're going to challenge you in some areas today and hopefully renew a little of that passion that we each had when we got into the world of church planting. The church planting catalyst position is so much deeper than just a job. It is deeper than a to-do list. It is deeper than showing up for work every day. You know as well as I do, we live it, we breathe it. It's what drives us. And with that in mind, the first mark of a catalyst needs to be he's marked by being a person of prayer. You know as well as I do, it is our most important tool in the belt. And every aspect of our catalytic work depends on prayer. Starting with prayer for our geography. If we are not seeking the Father, pouring ourselves out over our geography, then we are really not doing the groundwork necessary to be effective. We need insight, and that insight needs to come not just by studying the facts and the figures of where we work, but in seeking the heart of God and what He would do, what He would want to do in our geography. That insight can only come from Him. We can be about our to-do list. We can be about our tasks on the day. But unless we're hearing from Father about His heart for the city, His heart for the area, then we're really selling ourselves short. So we need to be pouring ourselves out for the greater geography. We need to be praying for insight and for our civic leaders. We need to be praying that God would equip them, envision them, even if they don't know Him, that He would steer and direct their movements. We need to pray for the businesses that are in our area. These businesses provide well-being and support for our families that live in our geography, and they're an important part of the ecosystem that we're trying to reach. Remember, as a catalyst, we're trying to own the geography. We're not just trying to plant a church. And businesses play an integral part of that in that they provide for our people. I have a quick story to tell about a business leader who's a friend of mine, but I approached him with transforming the city, and he realized that the part of town in which his business was not the best part of town, and some city transformation would do his business well. So I approached him on funding some of our activities, and he gladly participated in that. Even though he didn't see the spiritual need, he saw the need for the geography to be transformed, and we were able to capitalize on that and bring him to the table of our initiatives. So businesses, pray for our businesses. We need to pray for the workers that are in our city. Our church planners need to reach those folks. Pray that their hearts would be softened, that they would be open to the gospel, that they would be flexible to come. You know as well as I do, people are busy these days. They reserve Saturday and Sunday for family. They commute all day during the week, and so they don't want to participate in midweek activities. Those are challenges to our church planters, and they serve as reasons to pray for our geography, for the workers in our towns, that the Holy Spirit would prep their hearts to hear that one encounter with a church planter or a lay leader inviting them to church. We need to do that groundwork in prayer. Then we need to pray for our churches. Our churches are key to this whole thing. We need to pray that God's Spirit would move through our churches, through our existing leadership. We need to pray that our pastors and leaders catch that same vision for the geography that we have. As we pray for them, we ask God to open their eyes, open the eyes of the laymen that are in our churches, that they would see the big task, the task of the Great Commission in their geography, the transformational nature of God's Spirit as he moves through the geography, and that they would catch a vision for that. That only happens when God's people are praying. Then, as a catalyst, you need to be praying for yourself. Nothing is more important than getting yourself right before God, renewing your passion before him. Ask him to take you back to the beauty of that first call. Renew the passion and vigor that you once had for church planting. Keep that in constant prayer so you don't lose it. Ask for a spiritual covering from the Lord, that he would protect you from those things that would derail you. The last thing any of us need in catalytic work is to fall to some temptation or in some other area and cause all the work that we've done for the gospel of Christ to crumble. We need to be aware. We need to be asking the Lord to cover us with a protective shield. And then we need to pray for our own self-awareness and our own proficiency. We need to be asking Father to reveal those things to us that we don't know about ourselves, the things that we don't know that we don't know. Those things can be our hindrances in this work. Ask the Lord to expose those things and to make you aware of those things so that you can be a better catalytic worker for his purpose and his intent. Also for your proficiency, always be praying that you'd be open to learning new tasks, learning new skill sets, that you are completely a blank page before the Lord, willing to learn the trade, the art, the craft of being a church planting catalyst. And then lastly, we need to pray for our church planners. We need to pray that the Spirit of God would move before them and do amazingly, exceedingly, abundantly, far greater than they can think or imagine. Pray for their longevity. Pray for their families. Pray for their wife. Pray for their footsteps as they move forward into the community, into the geography, and touch people with the gospel of Christ. We have to saturate catalytic work with prayer. The second habit of a catalyst is being a mobilizer. It's all about mobilization. Mobilization is bringing people together for action. It's really that simple. Whether it be a partner or a planter or a pastor or a donor, it doesn't matter. You're bringing people together for action. You can mobilize anything. Let's look at partners. You want to mobilize partners to the city. Foremost on the job description is mobilizing partners and planners to the city. We want to mobilize partners to our cities. We want to mobilize partners to our planters. But more than that, we want to mobilize partners to each other. You see, as we give them a vision for our geography, and then we mobilize them to each other, we connect them in relationship, we build a triangle of strength because those partners know each other and they operate on a commonality of loving our geography, loving our city, loving our town, loving our work. That connectedness keeps our partners engaged and mobilized to our geography. Then we need to talk about mobilizing the planters. We need to mobilize planters into greater fellowship with one another. They'll find strength in each other. They'll find strength in each other's struggles, in each other's strengths, in each other's weaknesses. They'll find fellowship together as soldiers in a foxhole do. Bonds will be created that will last a lifetime. We need to mobilize them together for the good of our geography, but more importantly, the health of each other, for sustained longevity. Mobilizing them to each other is huge in terms of reward and benefits. And then we need to think about mobilization to Send Relief. Send Relief is the new initiative at the North American Mission Board for bringing help with lasting hope to our communities. As we discover church planters in our geography that are dealing with disaster relief, community ministry, sex trafficking, employment, schools, medical and dental clinics, literacy, things that touch the community in a very tangible way, we need to begin to mobilize missionaries and partners in support of that church plant as they embark on these endeavors. Send Relief is going to prove to be a huge touch to our communities and our geography in the name of Jesus Christ. We need to begin to think about mobilizing at that level. Then we need to think about new opportunities. How do we begin to mobilize teams for survey taking in our neighborhoods to do the groundwork for our church planners that are coming? How do we begin to mobilize to catch the vision tours, big catch the vision tours and little catch the vision tours, but getting a steady flow of people through our geography so that they can fall in love with what God is about to do. And then missions, bringing people on missions to our local geography so that they can fall in love there. I continually find that the church planters in our cities, in our geographies, usually, in many, many cases, visited that city or that geography as a student missionary when they were younger, and they came back to plant a church there. The third mark of an effective catalyst is partnership. We need to hone our skills in partnership development. As you know, NAM talks about partnership development in terms of sending and supporting churches, and we're going to unpack that a little bit. But I also want to talk about local churches and partnering with our church planters. So let's first look at sending church partnerships. As we begin to partner with our sending churches, we need to encourage them to partner with a specific church planter. In fact, that's the heart of a sending church. The sending church, like the adoption of a child, makes sure that the child has food to eat, that they grow in a healthy way, that they become self-sufficient, they go off to college, and they launch them out to start their own family. In the same way an adoptive parent would care for their child, a sending church cares for that adopted church planting family. That specific planter becomes part of the sending church's DNA, part of their family, part of their leadership team. That sending church is determined with the success of that church plant and the care of that family. As the catalyst, we have to facilitate those connections. There are times when someone will come into our geography and they already have their sending church, and that's wonderful. However, there are church planters in our city that do not have a sending church, that need a sending church. More than just a name, they need an adoptive parent that can come and be that sending church for their family, for their church body. So we need to facilitate that connection. One way to do that is by connecting those sending churches or potential sending churches to the field so that they can see the field, meet the pastors, meet the church planters, and fall in love with them and adopt them to become a sending church. The next level of partnership, obviously, is a supporting church. We need to connect those supporting churches to our church planters in ways that pray for that church planter, participate with that church planter, or provide for that church planter. The more supporting churches that our church planters have around them, the more likely they are to succeed. Obviously, praying is the foremost way that our supporting churches can help our planter. But then there's participate as well. They can participate on projects, on block parties, on canvassing of neighborhoods, whether they are 10 states away or right across town. That supporting church can help in the projects of our church planters, helping them with manpower that they wouldn't normally have. And then your job as a catalyst is to constantly challenge those supporting churches to do all that they need to do for that church planter. Sometimes our church planters won't ask for help, but if we're relationally connected to those church planters as we should be, as their church planting catalyst, we can then ask the supporting church to come in and provide help where help is needed for our church planters. Challenge is a big part of being a catalyst, knowing who to challenge, how to challenge them, and make that happen by partnering with other people and surrounding our church planters with those partners. Also, as a catalyst, you need to know your local pastors, your local churches. You need to know who those guys are. You need to get around and learn from them, build them up, let them build you, let them know your planters, let your planters know who they are. That relational engagement is paramount for starting to integrate the local geography into a team. Team building at the local level is huge. You may not find a sending church, but you can definitely find some supporting churches by tilling that ground. That relational engagement, going around to all your existing churches and inspiring them with the stories of your church planters that are on the field, might get them engaged with those church planters. But another thing it affords you to do is to leverage influence. Maybe a local church is not ready to adopt a planter yet, but you can leverage their influence to bring other partners to the table. A lot of our local church pastors would say, hey, I'm not really ready to engage yet, but I can definitely pray. But I will leverage my influence towards that church planter for you because I know a couple guys in town that are ready. That's key. Again, we're back to challenge. We need to challenge our local churches to get involved at the local level. And then, as you build relationships with those pastors, you can also ask them to tap their resources directly. It's one thing to leverage influence. It's one thing to ask a pastor to speak on behalf of a church planter for you. It's a whole other thing to ask that pastor to introduce you to 2 or 3 others and you make that appeal directly. By getting permission to tap their resources, you're opening up the potential for partnerships to a secondary level that you didn't even know existed. Pastors know pastors, and they are your key to extending your influence beyond who you know to who they know. And then lastly, we need to work with our church planters in partnership development. We need to help them understand that partnerships are important. We need to take them with us as we develop partners on their behalf. We need to let them see how we engage pastors and partners, and so that they can make the asks themselves. I joke sometimes that if grandma is not giving our church planter $1.75 a month, then what makes us think that he can raise any other support or that anybody else would believe in him? I say that humorously from time to time, but it brings up a serious point. If our church planters don't have the skill set to develop partners beyond their own realm of influence, then we haven't done our job correctly. We need to coach them up on how to make the ask, how to do it effectively. Because remember, partnerships and finance follow relationships. We need to introduce our church planters to people. We need to be working on their behalf, connecting them to others, bring them into the partnership development cycle, and then eventually release them to work those circles themselves. The fourth mark of an effective catalyst is the ability to find and develop leaders. That process starts with discovery. We need to research the places within our geography that young leaders are being built up, trained up, and empowered. Those may not be our churches. We need to have eyes that are open enough to see all the venues in which leaders are being developed. It might be businesses, it might be colleges, it might be trade schools or other venues of learning where we can tap the resources and find the leaders that we need to feed the future of church planting in our geography. As a catalyst, I would encourage you to begin researching all the places within your geography that leaders are being born. Even if it's a completely secular environment, there are Christians coming up through those processes, and it would be my hope that you could tap into those to bring them into your church planting world as you catalyze new works in your geography. The other thing is church planters know church planters. When was the last time you sat down with all your church planters and asked them a simple question? Where can we find new church planters to the city? I am amazed that our catalysts are not asking our church planters where to find more church planters. That's an untapped resource, and we need to be diligent to survey our guys that are already on the field. And lastly, we need to place ourselves in places where we can see leadership in action. We need to place ourselves in venues where we can see upcoming leaders and then tap them on the shoulder after the event and say, hey, I want to talk to you, and begin to make those relational connections that might eventually lead to a leadership role or a church planting role. Remember, not everyone's a church planter, but as you surround yourself, you put yourself in locations of leadership, you're going to find support staff, laymen that can all drive your church planting effort. The next thing about finding leaders is assessing them. This is so crucial. I'll share a story with you briefly. I was recently with one of our multiplying churches, a well-known multiplying church. I met with them and 2 of their upcoming church planters. Let's call the 2 church planters that I met in that meeting, let's call them Jim and John. Those are common names, and they can't be misconstrued as actual people. I met with the multiplying pastor after that meeting, and I told him, Jim's going to succeed. He's going to do great. John, not so sure about. I really don't think John's going to make it. And if he does, he won't have the success that Jim does. that pastor looked at me sideways and he began to defend John. And I told the pastor, I said, this is not a judgment call. This is just my observation. I've been down this road for years and years and years, and that's just my initial thought. I didn't mean any offense. I found out later that multiplying pastor had a vested interest in John and less of an interest in Jim. And that's why he was a bit defensive. But here's how it turned out. Jim became one of our greatest successes, and John, after a year and a half, ended up failing. Why did I know that was going to happen? How did I know that was going to happen? I don't know. The fact is, I've been around so many church planters, and I've seen this process so many times. I call it the blink. If you're not familiar with the book Blink, you need to pick up that book and you need to read it. It's about making judgment calls in 1 second, in the blink of an eye, and having them be accurate. And the synopsis of the book is that when you're around a certain thing so often and it becomes part of your internal culture, that you have the ability to make judgment in the blink of an eye using your subconscious mind and have no logical reason why you made the decision that you made. As a catalyst, you need to surround yourself so routinely with church planters and the way they think, the way they speak, the way they operate, their mannerisms, their habits, their vocabulary, their very presence, that you would have a reliable, quick assessment of their future success. That doesn't mean you're going to hit 100%. Nobody does. But you need to be so involved in prayer and your community and your geography that when somebody comes into that realm, you'll have a good idea whether they fit or not in a blink of an eye. The secondary and more reliable, more steady, more developed way of assessing is our system. There are so many good systems for evaluating church planning, behaviors, leadership ability, entrepreneurial skill set, and the like, that we can pretty much determine through those systems whether someone's going to succeed or fail. Work them through the system. Look at their Myers-Briggs. Look at their DISC. Look at their leadership inventory. Look at all those things and begin to assess whether this is a viable candidate or not for your geography. And then there's the hard stuff. A lot of times they don't cut it. And there's no sense in doing an assessment if everybody passes. Sometimes you need to make the hard call. Sometimes you need to tell somebody you're not cut out for church planning. You are doing them a favor by having the hard conversation, by making the call. You are saving a marriage. You are rescuing a wife. You are protecting children by taking a prospective church planter who is not ready to church plant and being honest with them. And then lastly, we need to develop our leaders. Finding is one thing, but developing them is more important. Ongoing communication. We need to be fully engaged in communicating to our church planters. Communicating with them at such a relational level that they can ask any questions that they might be struggling through, and they can hear your advice and hear your answers, that they can feel the confidence to bring anything that they need to bring to you. And in developing that relationship, you're also honing the skill set of that church planter. You're opening him up to be able to have those conversations with you and ask you the questions that he's struggling with and wrestling with. And you need to open up events and opportunities for them to learn, for them to sharpen their iron. As a catalyst, you need to be researching what are the best things that I can get my planters to improve their skill set, to build their proficiency, to sharpen their edge. That constant bringing of opportunities and venues by which they can grow will not only grow them as a leader, but it'll grow the relational connection between you and that family. And that can only end in success. And then lastly, frequent challenges. A lot of times as we're developing leaders, we get them started on their path. They launch their church there often. We let them go. I would encourage you to challenge them on an ongoing basis. Every time you visit with them, ask them where they're at and then challenge them to the next higher level. Ask them how things are going and then challenge them beyond those realities. Always inspire, always challenge, always empower them to work at the next level. As a side note, we need to challenge pastors to have eyes on their congregation. If we go back to partnering, which was the last habit of a catalyst, we talked about how we need to meet with our local churches all the time. Well, that correlates directly with finding new leaders for our geography. Challenging the pastors of our existing congregations to have eyes on their congregation for future leaders is more important than you can imagine. It's anecdotal, but I would say 80% of our pastors out there have no clue on who the upcoming young leaders are in their congregation, nor have they even thought to observe that. And of the 20% that do see those leaders coming, they want to train them and hone them for their church to operate their gifts and talents within their congregation. We as Catalysts need to challenge our existing pastors to raise those guys up and launch them out. There's a challenge I bring to our existing pastors all the time. I ask them to look at their congregation and look for the young man who the mantle of God is hovering above his shoulders, maybe a foot above his shoulders, and go to him and put your hand and slowly push that mantle down onto the shoulder of that young man. The word picture is clear. We need to look for those leaders that don't even know they're leaders yet. And we as pastors, existing men of God, we need to speak into those young men's lives and steer that and acknowledge it and encourage God's use of that individual for the kingdom of God. If our existing pastors would do that faithfully, we would have a flow of potential church planters that is greater than our ability to assimilate. They're out there. They're in our churches. We just need to find them, assess them, and develop them for kingdom growth and for success. Okay, so let's talk about the fifth habit of a catalyst. That is training. In our work, progress and sustainability come with ongoing learning. We need to train churches, people, and ourselves. We need to work with our local churches and train them to engage. We need to give them the big vision for what's outside the walls. If we're going to successfully mobilize a higher percentage of SBC churches to the field, we need to get them to look out the window. One of the remarkable things that is happening in SBC life today is the revitalization and re-energizing of local churches that are too small to send a church planter out themselves. But as they engage a church planter, they begin to experience excitement and revitalization in their own church. What happens is simple. They leave the walls, they go over and help a church planter for a Saturday with a block party or with canvassing the neighborhood. And then they come back and they ask the same questions that the church planter is asking about his neighborhood in their own neighborhood. They're looking at the actions of that church planter and his team and saying, why aren't we doing that here? And they begin to reflect on the actions of the church planter, begin to implement that in the local setting, and begin to find some revitalization. We also need to train our partners to enlist other partners, encouraging our existing pastors to be recruiters for new partners, sending church pastors, talking to other church pastors that they know to become sending churches themselves, but training them formally to enlist other partners, how to have that conversation, how to bring someone along and let them catch the vision for supporting church planting in the geography. And obviously, something most of us do really well is training church planters to plant churches. There are many trainings out there. Many of our associations, many of our state conventions have implemented trainings like Church Planter Basic Training and Church Planting Essentials from DCPI in California. There are a lot of other programs out there to get a church planter the vision and the beginning skill set to plant a church. And then after they've been assessed, after they've planted, after they've gone through the North American Mission Board process, we also have Multiply, Boulevard, Replant, bivocational, and collegiate training tracks for them to develop them. And then as a catalyst, finally, we need to look for other venues of training. Training that increases our overall church planting footprint on the field. Training for prayer walking, training for block parties, or for sports ministry, community outreach, all kinds of different trainings available. As a church planting catalyst, it's part of our responsibility to seek out good trainings that we can bring to our geography. The sixth mark of a catalyst is coach/mentor. There are differences. The coach is not a mentor. and vice versa. A good coach will seek to draw the answers from the church planter through a series of questions, a series of good dialogue, an encouraging and uplifting draw from the church planter, and help him focus on the things that need to be focused on and the conclusions that need to be reached. While a mentor typically is one who's walked that road before and can help guide and direct that path for the church planter. It's important as a catalyst to understand which one you are. Very few people are both. There's a tendency to throw coaching and mentoring together as synonymous terms. They're not. They're extremely different. While very few people are both, there are some people that are neither. However, most of us gravitate towards one or the other, and identifying which one you are can help you as you seek to coach or mentor your church planters. It really is about leaving a legacy. As a catalyst, you're in a position to do an amazing thing, to paint an amazing picture, to build an amazing future for church planters and church planting teams that you've been entrusted with. You're in a privileged position to impart skill sets and to impart ideals and practices that will make a difference in increasing the kingdom. Personally, I'm a better mentor than a coach, so I've always tried to walk with a cohort of church planters and share with them my life experiences, help them overcome their barriers, and talk them through the difficulties they face. I call it the funeral test. Let me explain. There are 3 men in my life that I know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, I would not be where I am today if it were not for these 3 men. Forgive me if it sounds morbid, but I will be at their funeral. Doesn't matter where I am at the time. It doesn't matter where they are at the time. I will make my way around this globe to be at their funeral and pay honor to those 3 men that spoke into and imparted values and ideals and strategy into my life. I think about that as I meet with these young men. I want to live my life in a way that these men that I'm privileged to speak into their lives would someday feel that I have added such value to their life that they, like me, would travel from anywhere on the planet to pay honor at my funeral. Not because of who I am, but because of what God has done through me in that life. I think we have the privilege as catalysts to play that important a role in the lives of these church planters. And then the last question I need you to ask as a catalyst is, who's mine? Who's coaching or mentoring you? Every one of us need to sharpen our skill set. We need to be on a lifelong pattern of learning. If you don't have a mentor, if you don't have a coach, I encourage you to seek one out to be the best that you can be. There are individuals out there that if you would come under their training, it would transform you in your proficiency, in excellence, in integrity, in spirituality. These are all areas that we continually need to refine in our lives. Remember, coaching and mentoring are leader discipleship. As we move to the 7th mark of a catalyst, we're entering into more of an administrative realm. The first is supervision of individuals. As we supervise our church planters, even though it's not in a formal context, we do need to be responsible to help them improve. We need to work with them and establish benchmarks for their success, helping them determine what success looks like and set success markers in their future so that they can feel like they're progressing in a healthy way. These markers give them something to work against for their future. Benchmarks are practical steps that they can work against on a daily basis and are not dependent on issues that are out of their control. For example, getting to 200 after the first year would not be a good benchmark. It's out of their control. Knocking on 1,000 doors over the course of the next year, that is a clear benchmark because it is attainable. It's within their control to make it happen. At times, we set our church planners up for failure because we give them benchmarks or we allow them to set benchmarks that they have no control over. This does not help the progress of the church. Those would be goals, not benchmarks. And then with benchmarks, we need to measure. There's no sense in doing any activity in the church plant that we're not going to measure. Measuring tells us where we're at. Without that data, we are without the assurance of knowing that we're progressing in a sustainable, tangible way. Then we need to help the church planter set realistic goals. It's amazing to me how many church planters don't have short-term goals, long-term goals. They're not striving for things in their future. We also need to help the church planter understand the importance of celebration. The most common mistake I find among church planters is they set a lofty goal and then they fail to celebrate until they reach that goal. We need to tell them, celebrate every movement, every action that lends itself to progressing toward that goal. It drives energy in the congregation and it creates an environment of celebration, reward, renewal. I like to share a story about how I learned this in a very tangible way. We were in Europe, in Paris specifically, and we were standing at the ground level of the Eiffel Tower. And I looked up, my kids were 8 and 10 at the time, and I looked up at the top of the Eiffel Tower and I told the kids, because I wanted to give them an experience they would never forget. So I looked up at the top of the tower and I said, guys, we're going to climb those stairs. And as every 8 and 10-year-old would do, they looked at me like I was crazy. And then I noticed my daughter look over and see the elevator sign. And she looked back at the stairs, looked over at the elevator, then looked at me with this look of puzzlement on her face. But I knew that they needed to go up the stairs for the memory. So I began to drive them up the stairs by counting each stair. So I started 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, counting like this, and they were walking like they were walking through molasses. They did not want to go up those stairs. So I got an idea. At stair 50, I jumped on the 50th stair and I said, 50! And I celebrated this mini dance on step 50, and they looked at me like I was crazy. 51, 52, 53. I got up to step 100 and I jumped on step 100 and I said, 100! And I celebrated again. And they were embarrassed because people were coming down the stairs and other people were coming up around us. 101, 102, 103. Up at 150, I jumped on 150 again. Now, here's what started to happen as we were increasing. My kids started to get more and more into it. Begrudgingly at first. I remember my daughter passing step 200 or 250 and then touching it with her toe and going like 250 with a less than excited count. But let me tell you, by step 500, they were racing each other up the stairs to jump on 500 and to celebrate that landing. It became infectious. And when we got to the top, I remember my son saying, "Hey, Dad, look over there. Look at those roofs. They're golden." And my daughter would say, "Look at the river over there," pointing out different things in the environment. And I thought to myself, had I not celebrated those landings, they would be up here in a bad mood, grouchy, and they would miss the view from the top. I think that is a great story and illustrates what our church planners do. They save the celebration till they're at the top landing, and they don't celebrate all the work to get there. And because of that, their people miss the glorious view from the top. But if they would celebrate every benchmark, every step that aims towards that goal, when the people get there, they can celebrate and truly celebrate that event. Another necessary aspect of supervision is accountability. We need to hold our church planners accountable. And you need to have relationship to be able to do that. Relationship affords frequency in having those conversations. And we have to have those conversations frequently if we want our church planners to progress in a healthy way. The myth of accountability is that our church planners don't want to answer to anyone and they want to do their own thing. But let me tell you, if a relationship is in place, if you've worked on the relationship with that church planner, they want to be accountable to you. They need that extra set of eyes on their actions, on their church, on their people, on their family. Healthy accountability is a wonderful thing, and as church planting catalysts, we sit in a unique position to provide it. And then finally, be a bridge. As a person in a place of supervision, We can be a bridge to success for those that we supervise. Be a source for success. As we talked about in training, look for those venues to make that church planter better. Empower them and release them to the field. Don't command and control. We need to avoid telling a church planter what to do. I tell my church planters this: you're a 10 at what you do. And where you're a 10, I might be a 7 or a 6. If I tell you what to do, I might bring your 10 down to an 8 because I'm a 6 telling you how to do it. I want to be able to speak empowerment to you, get you the resources that you need to do what you need to do and operate at a 10. And if I can undergird that and support that, you might even work at an 11. Be an empower and release leader, not a command and control leader. Finally, the 8th and final habit of a catalyst is administration. It's last because, frankly, it's the one that most of us are the worst at. Most catalysts are strategic thinkers. They're relational. They're out with their church planters most of the time. They're out surveying, enjoying the environment, living within the geography, getting to know the geography. And the last thing any of us want to do is chain ourselves to a desk to shuffle papers. It may be number 8 on our list, but it is important. Remember, excellence comes from mastery of the ordinary. And unless we're willing to do administration and do it right, we're going to be hindered in all these other areas. First and foremost, time management is integral to administration. The tyranny of the urgent wants to keep us so focused on unimportant tasks and fill our calendars with nonsense. We need to step back, look at what we do on a daily basis, qualify it as urgent or important. Most of us are very busy doing urgent stuff that is not important. We need to back up from that and spend time in the important. The other thing that can really hinder our work is systems proficiency. If we're not proficient in the systems, then our church planners pay the price. Nobody sees that more than I do. As the regional approver of all church planners, I see how they get delayed or miss a month of funding directly related to the catalyst's inability to get them through the system in an appropriate time. Usually because of careless mistakes, not seeing that they were coming up against a deadline, not noticing that a reference wasn't back, all related to systems proficiency. We need to be intimately familiar with the request and application portal, with the church planning growth projector, with the systems that our states have in place. There are so many systems in the greater SBC church planting realm, and we need to be the master of them all. Church planters should be able to call you and get through the system and know exactly why they're hung up, and also be able to rely on you to get them through. Finally, agency navigation. Remember, churches are our number one customer. We need to work with our churches. We need to work within the systems to empower those churches to become sending and supporting churches. We need to create dialogue with those churches to empower our local church planners on the field. We need to understand the associations and the expectations they place on our church planters. We all work more intimately with the state conventions, so we need to understand those processes. And then we need to understand how our church planners relate to the North American Mission Board as well. As the catalyst, you need to be the source of information for that church planter on the field. And let me drill down on one ideal. This is important. You need to be the source to answer their questions. Customer service dictates that you need to find the answer. Here's what typically happens. A church planter asks a catalyst, how do I ... The church planter says, I'm not sure, call this person. The planter calls that person and then calls the church planter back. He didn't know. Is there somebody else that I can call? So the catalyst gives him another number of someone else they can call. Or he says, call the help desk, call this, call that. And it creates a trail of activity that can get out of hand. I want to encourage you with this. For the sake of customer service and expediting a church planter's process, if a planter asks you a question, don't make them find the answer. You find it, you do all that chatter, and then you get back to them with the answer. It's something we've trained at in NAM culture. If the question comes to us, the answer comes from us. We do the back work, and then we provide the answer. It's about customer service. Many of our delays in the systems are because of the chatter in trying to answer questions. As a catalyst, one that values customer service, it's your responsibility. If the question comes to you, the answer comes from you. Now, let's put this all together. I want to talk a minute about emotional intelligence, one aspect of it, which is self-awareness. As a catalyst, you will be most effective if you have high self-awareness. You need to ask yourself a series of questions and ask yourself them regularly, especially about these 8 marks. Here's some questions to ask. Which of these 8 habits come naturally to me? Perhaps prayer, mobilization, and finding leaders are what you're really good at. That's great. You need to know that because you can capitalize on those strengths. Ask yourself, how do I leverage those to be even better in this ministry? Then I want you to ask yourself, which habits drain you the most? Which are the ones that you absolutely hate to do? You still need to do them, but that self-awareness of knowing that you're going to drop the ball in that area because you loathe that activity. Maybe it's administration and training. And so how do you mitigate those? And then which areas do you need to improve? Maybe you're not the best coach, you do an okay job. You're not the best at supervising, but you can get it done. And partnership development, you've really struggled in that area. How do you get the needed improvement? How do you train yourself? How do you begin to implement and place structures around you that bring you down a path towards excellence in those areas? And then ask yourself, what are my steps for proficiency? Especially in those yellow and red areas that you're not that good at and that you absolutely despise. You need to put down some action steps to making those areas better. You may enlist individuals to help you in those areas, especially if you're really bad at administration. Get a couple folks around you that can volunteer their time and help you in administration. People love to train other people. If you're weak in training, then get some people around you that would gladly train the church planners, because remember, it's not your responsibility to be excellent at all these 8 areas. It's your responsibility to make sure that all 8 of these areas are covered. Then, maybe in your yellow areas, in your weaker areas, you can seek a trainer to help train you to be better in that. Your yellow areas are areas where you can improve. I mean, you can improve in the red areas too, but you're going to be less motivated to do so. In the yellow areas, you can see that progress. Find a fellow CPC. Find a Sin City missionary. Find someone who excels in that area and put yourself in proximity to learn from them and to or even ask them to embark on a training journey with you. And then daily, intentionally seek to improve in these areas. And if God's heart is to seek and save those that are lost, and in the hierarchy of church planters, existing pastors, local agencies, and all of that, He assigned one person to be the catalyst for all those individuals. He looked at that geography and asked, who can I send to bring it all together? And He spoke your name. If that doesn't fill you with a sense of awe, frankly, maybe you need to do something else. For me, that will empower me, strengthen me, and energize me to do the best that I can do as a catalyst in my geography. Thank you. God bless.